Today's the day. It launches today. The flagship Zen 5 processor. No, not the 9800X3D or the 9950X3D. The 9950X3D 2. Because we need a do-over edition? No, because we took two 9800X3Ds and slapped them onto one processor. Who is this processor for? It's a mystery. We need to do a full build. I mean, that's really what this comes to. Gigabyte made the Aorus motherboard, the X3D in the name. Although, kind of hilariously, the X3D feature, when you're using like a 9950 X3D, disables one of the CCDs. But this is a processor where both CCDs have the 3D V-cache. That's what we've got going on here. So this is our X870E motherboard, the premium of the premium motherboards. And then we've got our 9100 Pro from Samsung. And then we've got our silver, look at silver trim, silver lining. This is the 9950 X3D 2. We've also got our G.Skill Trident Z Neo F5 6000 CL28 memory. Very, very fast. We gotta do the build, and then we can talk about what's going on here, because it's dual 3D V-cache. Now, I like to give Gigabyte a hard time, but this is actually a really interesting board for a couple of reasons. If you're gonna do a build around AM5 for AI, and you're gonna have two AI, like say R9700 GPUs, this motherboard makes a lot of sense for that, because you get the X8, X8 Gen 5 configuration, but it's also got quick release, which makes it easy to add and remove your GPUs, especially if you carry it around. It's not good to transport a computer with the GPUs physically installed unless they're mechanically, fastened to your case somehow. This has 5 and 10 gigabit Ethernet on the back, a ton of USB-C and a ton of USB. And so, it's a pretty hefty motherboard. You can run 4 M.2 on it, although there is a little bit of a lane sharing worry there. You do have 2 SATA ports, Type-C, front panel USB. You got 4 Type-A ports for the front panel, in other words. So it's an interesting motherboard. It's a very interesting motherboard in a good way for AM5 for some of those heavier builds. Okay, so what's the verdict here? Why didn't AMD do dual 3D V-cache sooner? I think the answer is obvious. Dual 3D V-cache doesn't make sense for 99% of use cases. And yet, for a certain customer that we're going to talk about, this is exactly the perfect CPU for them. And they're going to buy a ton of it. But if you want a 3D V-cache CPU for gaming, this ain't it. If you want a multi-core monster AM5 machine for, productivity workloads and everything else, this is also not it. You can get a better CPU that is also from AMD for less, and it'll do it, and it'll do fine. So why would you buy this CPU? Mostly because you want it, or if you're in one of the edge cases where it actually does make sense for you to have 3D V-cache, or you just want an AM5 CPU that can actually run at 270 watts. Now, the 200 and 270 watt thing is interesting because you do hit a little bit of a thermal wall in some scenarios. And I think that we're going to see AM5 motherboards that don't handle that high wattage as well as they should. Now, the AMD design and the specifications that AMD gives motherboard manufacturers absolutely include the ability to deliver this many watts to the CPU. They should all work. It should be drop-in on any AM5 motherboard, especially 800 series. I suspect, but I don't know, that won't be the case in every scenario. There will be some motherboards that struggle to deliver the amount of power that this CPU can use. And if the motherboard can't deliver the power to the CPU, then the CPU is not going to run as fast as it should. AMD has used the power lever here to make sure that the dual 3D V-cache doesn't leave any performance on the table, or at least is at performance parity with their other available AM5 CPUs. That said, for people that want dual 3D V-cache, here is your option. And yeah, it's $900. You're going to pay for it. And if you are cost conscious, but you still want all the bells and whistles, AMD also has really good options for you that you can choose that cost less, and it will be fine. Now, what about for the person that this makes sense for? It's going to be a game developer. It is going to be someone who runs Linux, possibly. It is also possibly like a game server context. I think that game companies that build game servers from desktop class CPUs, which happens more often than you would think because of the high single clock speed, then this is a no-brainer. benchmarks. Okay, there's gaming and there's productivity, but then there's also code compilation, and I want to talk about the code compilation stuff more in the Linux video, but know that having 2 stacks of 3D Vcache generally does help you with those kind of workloads. In fact, any kind of Linuxy, servery, scheduling workloads, having all of your cores be more homogeneous generally is a fantastic thing. But there are some really interesting results because keep in mind your 9950X3D2 also has a higher power budget. So anywhere that the not quite as high clock speed would be a thing. Like as I was working on this, we went back and we added the 9950X because I know, like as I describe it, it's like, oh, the immediate question is like, okay, 9950X, I know my workload, maybe the 9950X. And generally, if you do know your workload and you know that it won't benefit from more 3D Vcache, then you can save a bunch of money and get one of the other CPUs because AMD has a CPU that does everything. And really, the 9950X 3D 2, I think, is a little bit of a pipe cleaner for testing to make sure that the sockets and motherboards can deliver the power, maybe for Zen 6, but also kind of a halo product just for people that really want it. So 9950X3D2, 9950X, 9850X3D. Now, look at the memory bandwidth here, though, with the 9850X3D, because when we're talking about productivity and everything else, this is an 8-core part, but the memory is only 62 gigabytes per second. Generally the memory is much slower, and the speed is roughly the same between all of our 16 core parts. And it's because you need 16 cores to saturate the 2 memory channels that you have. And it's not even really saturating the memory. Like there's some performance that's left on the table here by AMD. And that's important because the 3D Vcache can actually take pressure off of the relatively anemic connection from the I/O die to system memory. It's not really anemic, but it's one of the weak spots in the I/O die from Zen 4 to Zen 5. I think AMD it's a cost decision, a conscious decision, I'm sure, but the Zen 5 CPUs would have definitely benefited from having a faster or more efficient interface to system memory. But having more Vcache means that there is generally less pressure on system memory, and that'll show up in some interesting places in the benchmarks. But for now, let's take a quick look at like CPU-Z. It's like CPU-Z. It's like, oh, look, the 950X3D2 is pulling a little ahead in multi-core. In single core, it's just a tiny, tiny little bit behind our 9950X and our 9950X3D, even with its higher power budget. But because it has a higher power budget, the multi-core score is going to be higher. Makes sense to me. Cinebench 23, it's pulling ahead. And, even with the single core just being almost, not quite, margin of error worse, but Cinebench 2024. It's a larger workload. It fits better in the cache, or it fits better in the more cache. And so it's 144 versus, 140-ish on the other systems. Because I think if you look at the scheduler, and you look at how things are like the chiplet configuration of the 9950X3D is you've got 2 good chiplets, one with Vcache and one that clocks really high. And so most of the time when you're doing this kind of a workload, the single core stuff, it lands on the high clock speed chiplet. And so because of that, the 9950X3D is scoring about 140 here instead of 144 because that single thread, if you use process lasso and move it over, you'll still get about 144 for your single core performance. But just remember that this 9950X3D2 also has a higher power budget. I think it's 200 watts TDP, but like the PPT is like 250 or 270, something like that. And we will see, like, there will be boards that behave in a sus way, I predict, when you are at a PPT that is that high. Fortunately, our ICE Aorus board here, very nice. Geekbench 6, the CPU scores, things line up pretty nicely here. The Geekbench CPU scores obviously can use 3D Vcache, and our single core performance here is a little higher. OpenCL here just for fun, yeah, 3D2, it's like Vulkan. The 3D2 is a little, this is the opposite of what I would expect, but okay, games. Let's start with Cyberpunk 2077. Cyberpunk 2077. 9850X3D2, 233 FPS, 9850X3D, 241 FPS. The AMD software update will affect existing users that have 3D Vcache. It's better, more intelligent scheduling, but basically same performance at 1080p. If we step up to 1440p, it's pretty much the same story. If we go to 2160, it's like we are basically identical performance across all 3 of our CPUs. If we do Ultra with ray tracing at 1080p, we have basically identical performance between our gaming CPU and our dual Vcache CPU same performance at 1440p, same performance at 2160p. The 9850X3D is maybe slightly ahead here, like 1 or 2 FPS higher, but this is almost within margin of error because it's 60 FPS. It's not super playable with the ultra ray tracing, but that's Cyberpunk. Now, what about Borderlands 4? Borderlands 4 is interesting in that it has enough threads, generally, to keep things pretty busy. And look at that, 9950X3D2 scoring really, really well. Now, I've done some tweaking that I will talk about, and this is to do with a driver tweak and also curve optimizer. And so if you use curve optimizer and effectively undervolt your CPU, at least the particular CPU that I had was even better performance, which was kind of shocking and a little weird and not something that I'm entirely used to, but the curve optimizer this time around really did something amazing. PBO did not do anything for me at all, but curve optimizer, it's like, oh, it's actually performing a little bit better. You will see probably in other benchmarks that our Kraken 360 AIO really helped manage things, but 95 degrees C is normal, and the CPU will really, really get to that 95C quickly when we're running heavier workloads and productivity workloads, as we'll see. And sometimes it matters for gaming. Borderlands 4, I was surprised at the performance uplift here because this is non-trivial, 131 to 115 FPS. I don't think this is a testing artifact. Sometimes Borderlands 4 does weird stuff on me, but I did have a lot of fun actually playing Borderlands 4 and enjoying Borderlands 4 and trying to make Borderlands 4 be a little less janky. Now, Deus Ex Mankind Divided is one of the games on AMD's list where they have made some improvements. And yes, 303 FPS versus 268 on our 9850X3D. Now, our 9850X3D testing does not have the updated driver, so it is possible the updated driver will improve things for the 9850X3D. If you see other reviews where the 9850X3D is performing similarly, maybe the updated driver makes a difference there. I wouldn't expect it to, because most of the language in the updated driver announcement was around 3D Vcache improvements from a scheduling standpoint, but Deus Ex Mankind Divided, like, we're getting similar performance. Also, with my driver tweak, I improved the 1% lows, and that's really what I was going for, because some of these games I was like, okay, can I maybe use Process Lasso or an Affinity Mask and Curve Optimizer to get a little bit better game performance? And the 1% low is generally less, but it often hurt the top line frame rate a little bit, like 1 or 2%. So this is maybe another video, another conversation for later. But our 9950X3D2 with more Vcache and more wattage, the 1-2 punch, yeah, it's going to be faster. Far Cry 6, this is the biggest improvement with the 9950X3D. You have the, it's like 187 FPS. Software platform update, boom, 239, and basically everything is running as it should. So, driver update, if you have a 9950X3D, this will probably improve things. I'd love to hear from you in the forum what your experiences are. But yeah, Far Cry 6 and Deus Ex Mankind Divided were specifically called out in the new driver updates stuff that's available, I think, today or tomorrow for these games. So it's good to see that. Final Fantasy, 337 FPS and 9850 pulls a little ahead, and the 9950X3D 1% lows are improved because Windows doesn't bounce our processes from the high clock speed. No Vcache chiplet to the Vcache chiplet with the platform update. Clar Obscur, similar performance, 1080p, 1440p, 2160p. For whatever reason, Clar Obscur was just running a little bit behind, and I suspect this is because there's stuff in Clar Obscur that is built specifically, like they have some stuff in there, and this is a CPU that's not in the list, and so it is a few FPS behind. This is resolvable with Process Lasso or Affinity Mask, so if you want identical performance, you can totally get it. I just don't have it graphed here. Don't zone out because it's not in the graph. But if you use Process Lasso, this is fine. Game bar and core parking should, I think, also, like, I'm surprised that it didn't, but, it's fine. Monster Hunter Wilds, identical performance to a 9850X3D at 1080p and 1440p and 4K. It actually pulls a little ahead at 4K. Shadow of the Tomb Raider, just to have something to baseline, 9950X3D2 and 9850X3D, basically identical performance, pulling a little behind.
1440p, similar performance. 2160p, it's basically identical performance across the board, except our 1% lows are a little worse than the 9950X3D. Okay, let's talk for a sec about productivity. Blender. The 9950X3D 173. And my first curve optimizer profile here was 167. Now, the curve optimizer profile for Cinebench, I could get, you know, another like 3-4% in Cinebench, but it hurt my Blender performance. So this is completely bone stock defaults just with the memory XMP profile loaded 173, which pulls ahead of our 9950X3D. Junk Shop, same story. Monster, same story. At 328, this is a pretty substantial lead, and I also managed to regress in performance a little bit on my curve optimized 9950X3D too. But generally, the curve optimizer did help with gaming, and I think that's something that I want to cover in a separate video. So it's really interesting to see this kind of a result. It's a really interesting choice that I think AMD made with the CPU to give you more wattage, given that PBO doesn't really do a lot on these parts, like the non-dual, like the 9950X3D, not 2, or the 9950X. Like, PBO does a little bit for you in general, but generally not a ton. Not this much. So it's surprising that there is this much more performance available. But like I say, I think this is sort of a dry run to see how things might go for higher power limit Zen 6 CPUs, and this may be something that we get more performance out of Zen 6 because more watts, which is pretty exciting to think about.
The other thing that I want to mention that I am pretty sure is going to fly under everybody else's radar is that 3D V-Cache takes a lot of pressure off of the memory controller, the I/O die. This is, I think, the weakest aspect of AMD's design for Zen 5 and moving from Zen 4 to Zen 5. It was, you know, for cost and complexity reasons, I'm sure that the I/O die wasn't updated from Zen 4 to Zen 5. But as fast as DDR5 memory is today, that controller is leaving a lot of performance on the table. Remember how much memory bandwidth we were just leaving on the table with just an 8-core configuration? It's like, oh, I need 16 cores to drive, you know, the bandwidth that you get on a dual channel DDR5 setup. But I got news for you. There's even more performance than that that's left on the table. From the CPU's perspective, from an executing code perspective, having the extra 3D V-Cache means that there's less pressure on the memory. It's going to make up for some of that weakness. And again, it's just my opinion. There's trade-offs, right? There's trade-offs. And this is a deliberate decision that AMD made in order to, you know, meet cost or complexity or yield, or they just had a bunch of AM5, you know, I/O dies, whatever the reason. And I think that having the 3D V-Cache on both chiplets alleviates some of the memory pressure, which incidentally is why, like, if you're using AM5 for a server, or you're using like virtual machine stuff, or you're doing like heavy compilation workloads, those things benefit because you take pressure off of the memory controller. The memory is less of a bottleneck in that scenario. And that is why the CPU is ideal for those use cases where you depend a lot on memory, and the CPU has some ability to predict which parts of memory it's going to need. You're better able to utilize the bandwidth to memory that you do have. And for those customers that know their workload and know that their workload will benefit from the cache or benefit from a higher cache hit ratio to memory, they're going to buy the crap out of these CPUs. And AMD honestly probably could have charged more. So there's also going to be a certain class of gamer and enthusiasts that I think is going to pick it up and upgrade their system. And that is nice to see. But if you do have an older system that you are upgrading, make sure that your motherboard can handle the power requirements of this CPU. It's going to probably be a trip to the Level 1 Techs forums to see if anybody else has run into that. And that's what I'm going to be doing over the next couple of weeks, testing it. Oh, and I have also ordered, I've queued up an order for 5 of these CPUs to test in our gauntlet where I'm looking for CPUs to die. So we'll know if it's power related. We put those CPUs in those motherboards, and we just want to see. It's like, oh, the motherboard can't handle the power delivery, and it murders CPUs because there's not enough power. We'll know soon enough. But anyway, it's nice to see this product from AMD. Certainly people have demanded it, and there were people that were saying, it doesn't make sense for AMD to do that. And those people were right. But at the same time, I think a certain class of person is going to buy the crap out of the CPU. So we'll see. I'm Will, this is Level 1. I'm signing out. You can find me in the Level 1 forums.